What do you think the Kavanaugh hearings, what kind of impact will they have on the midterm? Because at first, the Democrats were quite happy that it might.
Deirdre?
The Republicans are happy that it will galvanize their base. What do you think is that? I think that both sides will be galvanized. It's just a question of who actually takes those feelings and shows up to vote. And it always comes down to that. We have more voters who favor
All right, let me
one of the
situate
tragedies
some
of
of this
what's
stuff.
happening in our electoral system is Republicans have systematically suppressed voters. Probably as many, Christian, as 12 million voters were purged by Republican governments in states.
Good evening.
Hello,
Hello.
Dr. Stewart.
Yes.
Hey, this
How
is
are you?
I'm doing well. Doing well.
Be good?
Yes, ma'am. How about you?
Oh, I'm good. I'm great. I'm doing great. I'm doing great. Just wanted to make sure I could get in
Yes,
without
ma'am.
any complications.
You're right
So
in.
you can hear me okay
I hear
and
you.
everything?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Well, do you want me to stay on the line and mute my and you can mute me, or you may just call back in a little bit later, right? I guess I might as well just wait. It's only about 5 or 10 minutes.
Yeah, it's about 10 minutes. It's up to you. We can mute you. You can call in close to the time, but you're in right now.
Yeah, I'll leave it alone.
Yes, ma'am.
So you'll unmute me. You'll give me a cue, I'm sure.
Yes, ma'am. I'll do a
Okay, great.
and then I'll intro you, and then you kill us like you do.
Well, I don't know about all of that. But I'll try to make sure that you don't regret you and Delma you and Dr. Coates don't regret asking me. How about that?
I can't even imagine
that. How have you been doing?
Been doing well. Been doing well. No complaints.
How's the church?
Church is going well. It's going well.
Good.
We have our own issues, but it's going well.
Yeah. Well, that's church for you. Mm-hmm. You're in Atlantic City, right?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Right outside.
Now, how far is that from New Jersey?
Well, we're in New Jersey. From New York?
From Newark. I mean, I'm sorry.
Newark. Yeah, we're about an hour and 45 from Newark.
Okay. I was just wondering. Greg is doing that commissioning service, that installation service this weekend. It's Friday night. Greg Jackson.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
For Light Carey. Uh-huh.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I think I'm going to be there.
Oh, you coming? Okay, great. All right. Well, I'll hopefully see you there.
Yes, ma'am.
Uh-huh. So do you all record these calls?
Yes, they are recorded.
So there's a callback number.
I'm not sure. So what we do is after the call ends, the file will upload to my computer. And I usually, the last time we did it, I just sent out the recording to our entire listserv.
Okay.
Because some of it's video, some of it's audio, so it's just better. It's better that way if I send the whole file to people. And it's also recorded on Facebook Live, so it'll live on.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay.
Smart news.
I was only watching news I agree with.
I was in the news and so
Sometimes I miss the call, and it would be nice to go back and hear the discussion, because a lot of times I'm traveling and I can't make the call,
Yes,
or
ma'am.
I'm in a meeting or something. So you say you record on Facebook Live, so maybe I'll start. I probably need to go and like the page.
Yeah, we'd appreciate that.
Yeah, I'll do that today.
We like when celebrities click on our.
Oh please, please, whatever. Whatever. You're very kind.
Tell the truth.
Mm.
Lose up to 13 pounds and 7 inches all in your first month. It's your favorite food.
Well, if you need to do some other things, you can go ahead and mute me and just come back and let me know. Cue me when it's time. I don't want to,
Yes, ma'am.
because I know about last minute preparations
Will do.
for meetings.
40% off every program. Let's get
Yes, ma'am.
shakes free. We just got married.
we're all under one roof now.
Congratulations.
Thank you. How many kids? Mike's 2, his 3.
Along with 2 dogs and Jake under parent.
That is quite a lot of colleges fit.
A lot of colleges. And you get any financial advice?
Yeah, but I'm pretty sure it's the same plan they sold me before.
Your situation's totally changed now.
Right.
How about a plan that works for 5 kids, 2 dogs, and Jake over here? That okay with you, Jake? Get a portfolio that works for you now and as your needs change. From TD Ameritrade Investment Management. Next, as the president rallies in Iowa, a young Democrat in that state pulls ahead of the Republican incumbent. Will Iowans send her to Congress? We like to see changes in politics. For that outfront, live next. How's Chapman mindful of customers' time? The customers tell me each and every day that they love the way we do business here. But the one thing that they're not so fond of is it sometimes takes longer than we would. Customers have things to do. We want to be more cognizant of their time. That is our number one purpose, to get you in and out quickly, effortlessly. Got a new Explorer with 0 interest for 60 months, plus $2,500 cashback or lease for $289 a month. You probably did pay too much. You know when you have a winning team. Dr. Michael Caruso and his expert team at Atlantic Eye Center have been providing comprehensive ophthalmic care for over 30 years. And at their high-tech Cape Cataract Surgery Center, patients benefit from the most advanced technology.
As a staff member, I can say the patients benefit from our personalized approach. We take the time to get to know each patient's special needs. As a patient, I trust the expert team and bring every member of my family to Atlantic Eye Center.
Schedule your appointment now with the winning team at Atlantic Eye Center. Special program now. Tony's Impact. Sunday at 9 on CNN.
We just heard from Hillary Clinton a little while ago, a new interview with CNN's Cristiano Capriacci from our experts. So jumping to does she help Hillary Clinton or hurt Democratic candidates now 4 weeks away from the midterm election?
But let me just say, in answer, I think Democrats are pathetic. They are afraid of everything. It's like, oh, we can't have Hillary Clinton talk because it'll motivate the Republican base. We can't have Barack Obama talk because it'll motivate their base. We can't talk about impeachment or it'll motivate their base. You know what? Hillary Clinton got 3 million more votes than the other guy in 2016. I don't see why she shouldn't be campaigning around the country. I don't see why Barack Obama shouldn't be campaigning.
Hey, brother.
Is an enormous.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Brother Francois, you might need not to be recording right this second while you're listening to your podcast, because that can't, that's a partisan conversation on your podcast. You don't want that to start your call.
Well, we're not. Okay.
Yeah.
right. I want to take this time to welcome everybody to the call and thank you for taking these moments to share with us the Black Church Center. This is our second Black Church Agenda, which is an online town hall, which allows us to engage persons of faith, primarily persons who are constituents of Black congregations, Black faith communities, in issues of justice, as we think deeply about what is the mission of Black faith communities, and we believe as an organization, as a think tank, that the nature of the Black church is rooted in liberation and justice, and so that's why we gather for these moments to push congregations to live out that high ideal, to live out the integrity of the gospel, the meaning of the gospel, which we find in liberation, in freedom, and in equality. So I welcome each of you tonight as we talk about poverty and the Black vote. We know that we are inching toward one of the most consequential election cycles of my lifetime and of most of our lifetimes. And it's important for us to not only think about voter registration, but also think about voter mobilization. How are we turning out the vote, which is is more important of a task, and one that is often not undertaken by faith communities. So tonight we're going to hear from representatives from a broad range of organizations, and each will give us framework around why this issue, why voting is important, and each will give us strategies and modes of fulfilling this work. So I'm excited about what we're going to dig into tonight. This is an important conversation, to put poverty in conversation with voting, because we do live in a country that is more plutocratic than it is democratic. Big money seems to have the loudest voice in our politics, and to a great degree, Wall Street owns Washington. And so it's important for us to have this conversation as we center the voices of persons in America who are hardworking, doing everything they can to put food on the table, hardworking Americans who are victims of America's food apartheid, America's healthcare apartheid, America's education apartheid. And so we are here to declare that the Black church is interested and committed to guaranteeing these public economic trusts that keep people from falling into abject poverty, because poverty is not a crime. There's nothing shameful about one's economic station, and there's nothing shameful about any type of work. All work is dignified. Work is a good, and so that's what we want to wrestle with tonight, as we're living in a culture where a lot of our public trusts, a lot of our public economic trusts, are being assaulted by conservatives, and we have progressives who aren't speaking loud enough. And so that's why, as the Black church, as Dr. King says, we are the conscience of the state. And so we're here to figure out how we can better be a conscience for this country that is taking some deep regressions in the past 2 years. And so I'm going to turn this call off to one of my heroes, to someone who is a clear, independent, courageous voice for justice, the Reverend Dr. Gina Stewart, who's the pastor of the Christ Missionary Baptist Church in Memphis, Tennessee, and the first vice president of the Lot Carey Global Missions Community. So, Dr. Stewart, if you are ready, you can lead us in your reflection.
I am ready, and thank you, Reverend Willie Francois, one of my favorite people in the whole wide world, for your generous introduction and for your reflections this afternoon. And to all of you who are on this call. Let me just say that I greet you with Jesus' joy, and I greet you as a fellow and a co-struggler in this struggle for voter rights, and as we struggle against voter suppression and voter and work to increase voter education and voter participation. This particular conversation is reminiscent of an event that took place this past August in Memphis, when the Memphis branch of the NAACP and the Shelby County Democratic Party filed separate lawsuits against the Shelby County Election Commission. The suit was filed because of the commission's decision to limit voting to 3 sites for the first 4 days of early voting. Now, Memphis is a city with more than 600,000 residents, but we also have inadequate public transportation. And the election commission, the Shelby County Election Commission, decided to limit voting to 3 sites for the first 4 days of early voting. The NAACP and the Shelby County Democratic Party argued fiercely and forcefully that, and of course many citizens agreed, that this decision would severely limit and disenfranchise voters, particularly in the inner city of Memphis, many of whom rely on public transportation, which is severely limited. Thankfully, the lawsuit was an act of resistance to the Election Commission's refusal to take the concerns of the city and its community seriously, particularly in a city that is more than 50% Black or African American. They asserted that the Election Commission's solutions were unacceptable and did not adequately address the unfair and unjust consequences that these actions placed upon average voters in Shelby County. Thankfully, the lawsuit prevailed, justice prevailed in this particular instance, and multiple voting sites were open to provide access to all early voting sites without the unnecessary barriers. Not only that, but this particular election in August resulted in an unprecedented number of African American women elected to office who will serve as judges, commissioners, and state senators and state representatives. We also elected a Black county mayor and a Black sheriff. I say all that to say that the situation in Memphis is just one example of the deliberate barriers such as reducing early voting days, gerrymandering to dilute Black voting, moving voting sites to remote locations with limited public transportation, and deliberately enacting voter suppression laws around this country to diminish the political power of African Americans. It becomes abundantly clear each day that quietly and gradually, state by state, the right to vote, a right that many people died to secure, is at risk of being taken away. In a time when it should be easier and simpler and more convenient to vote, legislatures around the nation are creating barriers and making it more difficult for citizens, particularly those of African American descent, people who are Black and brown, to vote. There is not just one law, but many types of laws that make it legal to disenfranchise millions of voters. Voter photo identification, proof of citizenship laws, barriers to registration, elimination of early voting and absentee voting, and laws make it harder to restore voting rights for people who have paid their debt to society. These barriers, as well as others, are a barrier to an inclusive democracy. It seems that we are stepping backward each day toward another dark time in our history. In the words of Dr. Barbara Williams Skinner, nothing diminishes the rule of law in our precious democracy more than voter suppression and efforts to marginalize and reduce the power of vulnerable voters. The right to vote in America is one of the most priceless benefits of our citizenship, and laws and policies aimed at suppressing the vote of African Americans and other vulnerable citizens is not only an attack on our right as citizens, but as free persons in a democracy. These acts are not only egregious, but morally reprehensible. It is institutional evil that deprives human beings of their right to well-being. Now, there are some that would probably argue that there is no moral or theological imperative concerning the right to vote, but this is where I believe that public theology informs our conversation. As pastors and preachers, we are primary interpreters of our traditions. Our traditions are not static. Wherever we live, wherever we work, wherever we serve, and in some cases, even where we play, we are interpreting our religious traditions. It is our common experience that lends itself to theological interpretation. For even in public life, specifically with regard to the right to vote, we are still making claims about what it means essentially to be human. We're making claims about what it means to have possibilities, making claims about what it means to have opportunity, making claims about what it means even to have faith. And public theology asks the question, where is God present in the world beyond our traditional spaces and places? Public theology seeks to discern where God is present not only in our public, beyond our traditional spaces and places, but also beyond our traditional understandings. Public theology wants to articulate in spaces that we typically call secular. And it seeks to subvert this sacred and secular divide. One of the first lessons I learned in seminary was that all of life is sacred. And when we don't subvert this divide, we limit our understanding of God, we limit the relevance of our religious tradition, we limit what it means to be a Christian and also to be a citizen in public society. We limit what it means to have a common destiny, what it means to be a member of a political community, what it means to have a shared faith, and what it means to work toward the common good. Public theology interrogates the sacred dimension of public life and political life. It examines the rendering of judgments on people's lives with acts such as voter suppression, police brutality, the repeal of health care for people who are the most vulnerable and who need it the most, and all of the ways that people render judgments about otherness in an attempt to strip away the sacred dimension of life. This also strips away the sacred dimension of public life, or what Dr. Christopher Ringer would call the desacralization of public life. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. captured this notion when he spoke profoundly about the power of the vote, when he said, "So long as I do not firmly and irrevocably possess the right to vote, I do not possess myself. I cannot make up my mind. It is made up for me. I cannot live as a democratic citizen observing the laws I have helped to enact. I can only submit to the edict of others." King's statement is one of the reasons why the church is so important and so crucial for this hour, and why I believe the church has a role in public life. We don't just live in church, we live in the world. And the church is an institution in the world. In fact, the church is not just an institution with one face, but an institution with two faces. It's an institution where we have a face by which we do the work of ministry, the care of souls, evangelizing, the sharing of the sacraments or ordinances, depending upon our tradition, the proclamation of the gospel, and embracing a prophetic witness. But we also have a public face in the world. We have a public ministry, a place in society. And our commitment to protect the right to vote for the vulnerable, for the poor, for the disenfranchised is not just a civic duty, but a moral imperative. We have a public ministry and a place in society, a face in the world, whereby we can intentionally use theological categories and language to not only sustain our public life, but help correct our public life. The right to vote is a precious and a sacred right, and one of the most important blessings of our democracy. It's in this particular season that I celebrate the work of the Black Church Agenda and others who are working diligently to protect this particular blessing. The lawsuits by the NAACP and the Shelby County Democratic Party, the work of the Black Church Agenda, the Up the Vote initiative that we initiated in Memphis, earlier this year, thanks to the leadership of Reverend Earl Fisher, pastor of the Abyssinian Baptist Church, has resulted in a bump, I should say, or an increase, not a significant increase, but an increase in not only those who are registered to vote, but persons who have gone to the polls, as we've seen in the results of our August election. This initiative is one whereby pastors and churches are making their church vans available, their minibuses available to provide transportation to the polls. We're holding voter education forums and seminars. We're hosting block parties to encourage people as we stand on street corners holding signs to go to the polls to vote. We're participating in voter mobilization and voter registration. These are just some of the ways that we're employing and utilizing some of the resources of our tradition as an act of stewardship, if you will, to protect this sacred right. For religion is not just a private affair, although there is a profoundly personal aspect to religion, but it's not merely private, it's also public. And our participation in public life as interpreters would be the proof to our children and our grandchildren, our nieces and our nephews, that at a time when there were attempts to divide the sacred from the secular, that God was still at work in the world.
Thank you so much, Dr. Stewart, for giving us that historical and theological framework for thinking about the sacred right, the civic sacrament of voting. So thank you so much, Doc, for getting us started in that way.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
No, thank you so much. I'm going to turn now to Deirdre Reed, currently of the Center for Community Change, to talk to us, to give us a state of play and some other intersectionalities between poverty and voting. Deirdre?
Good evening, everyone. I am so just humbled to, I'm just humbled and honored just to be on this call today. So I'm just going to get started. The conservatives, so this is we're all nonpartisan here. So this is not, this is not a Democratic Party call. This is a call about democracy. So we're going to talk about conservatives and progressive. So this year, the conservatives, and I can say at the helm of that call was the President of the United States, Donald Trump, declared that there was an end to poverty, and the war on poverty. And anyone left in poverty at this point was just basically lazy. And so as, congregants and as pastors and ministers and people of faith, I'm quite sure that you could think of, a whole bunch of folks that who are not lazy, who are actually struggling and trying to figure out how to make their ends meet. But what we're dealing with, I don't want to start this conversation with as if the world was falling apart. But I also want to be clear that that there is a war on poor people that is being enacted right now in the way in which we're living in this country. And so how has that looked over the last, year and a half, 18 months? There's been attacks on the Affordable Care Act. Luckily through the last 12 months, we've pushed that back and there's been some changes, but there's not been any expansion, but they have not been able to dismantle the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare. This year, the Farm Bill gets reauthorized every 5 years, but the Farm Bill holds many of the things that we love and cherish. So the historically Black colleges and universities, much of their, because most of them are land grants, most of their federal funding comes through the Farm Bill. What also is held in the Farm Bill is, the food stamp program known as SNAP, the WIC program for women, infants, and children, after school School lunches is in that program, after school programs, summer feeding programs. Many of you who have churches probably utilize some of these programs that are all under the Farm Bill. So the Farm Bill was to be reauthorized September the 30th. There was that did not happen on September the 30th because the House and the Senate could not agree upon the bill. And so where are we right now? Like what's at stake in this midterm election? Well, we know, after this last weekend with a conservative Senate, with a conservative House, and also now with a more conservative Supreme Court, where we will find ourselves as progressive in a very precarious position as it relates to our ability to move any kind of a progressive or proactive agenda. So how can we fight back this really truly assault on the poor, right? Assault on the poor. It starts with this midterm election. And so if you're thinking about like I don't know what state you all are from, but there's definitely, you look at the map. I just sent a map out, an interactive map out that I hope that we can share with the people that are on Zoom, but also figure out how to get it to folks that are on Facebook Live. But you probably know, it's like there's some telltale signs. You probably know whether or not you're in a battleground state. California, Florida, Iowa, Illinois, Kansas, Kentucky, Michigan, North Carolina, New Jersey, New York, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Texas have highly contested races in the House. In the Senate, there's Arizona, Nevada, Missouri, Indiana, West Virginia, North Dakota, Florida, Montana, Minnesota, and Ohio. Ohio have all of these states have highly contested races. And so as we're looking at what Dr. Gina Stewart was talking about, she was saying it very practically about what's happening at, her very local level. But if we're looking at what's going to happen with our country from the level of Congress and what we can see, moving out of 2018 all the way into 2020, our first line of defense is, starts next week with early voting all the way to the November 6th election. And so what do we need to be doing? We need to get our folks out to vote. What we know for sure, and I hope there's other panelists that are going to be on that kind of talk about this, but what we know for sure is that African-American folks vote, we vote every 4 years. That's when we show up to the polls. It was the president, if we're voting for a president, some kind of way it kind of feels like, like we're voting for, a monarch or something. I don't know. But we vote for the president every 4 years, but it's those other races like the midterm elections where we have a very low voter turnout. And so the goal is to get African Americans out to vote in droves over the midterm election, over this midterm cycle. And where am I going? And then I want to talk I'll pivot to what's at stake. So say we don't win anything. Say we stay at home, we kind of get into the chatter and we thought, we're mad about the tweets and we're into the personalities and we kind of just don't show up at the polls, right? If we don't show up at the polls, we will have a conservative House, we'll have a conservative Senate, and we'll have a conservative Supreme Court. We won't be able to do anything like turn to your neighbor and say, neighbor, we ain't going to be able to do anything. We won't be able to do anything because what we've done is help them to concretize their power. So if we think that they're emboldened now, 2 years, into a very conservative president's agenda that's already said that, if you're poor, you're lazy. And so it looks like, work requirements and all of these kind of punitive ways in which they're dealing with poor people. We will see more of that. And not only will we see more of that, not only will we see more of that, we will also see more attacks on things like in the social safety net, attacks on Medicare Part D for seniors, And then, I don't know if you all remember, but about 5 or 6 years ago, there was a huge campaign to privatize Social Security. And so if we're in a position where, like, if we put ourselves in a position where nothing changes today, it may seem like nothing changed, but it actually, will become more conservative. In the second scenario, if progressives can somehow recapture the Senate, we'll be in a far better position to be able to start looking at having a more proactive agenda. Now, do I think capturing the Senate will then, is that the magic wand and then all of a sudden, we're on easy street? Absolutely not, because we still have a conservative president that if we got anything passed, he would probably veto, right? Like if it was something that was, that he would probably veto in the long haul. But it sets us up better to figure out what we need to do in 2020. And so we should really be looking at this election for the end game of it all. Like, how are we setting ourselves up both locally with our elected officials, all the way up to the congressional level, to be able to play chess. I love when people say that. It's like, hey, we come to that same board, we're playing checkers and they're playing chess. They're 3 moves ahead while we're still trying to figure out like what the game is doing. And so what we really want to do is look at this as a chess game and say, this midterm election, if we do what we need to do, get some progressives elected, we'll be able to start pivoting so that we'll have a better chance at capturing both the House and the Senate and maybe even the presidency in 2020. The other thing that would happen if we captured the Senate that I want people to really understand is that because we didn't pass the Farm Bill, because there's still an attack on the Affordable Care Act, and because conservatives are all about no taxes or giving tax breaks to their rich friends, even if we capture, even if we do well in the midterms, we'll have to fight between November 7th of 2018 all the way until the new Congress comes into play to ensure that, in the lame duck session, that's what it's called, the lame duck session, in the lame duck session, that they don't just try to back a truck up to the back of, Congress and just figure out how to give money to their rich friends. What that would look like is passing a farm bill that favors agriculture, like corporate agriculturalists, and then doesn't do anything for poor people. What it looks like in the lame duck is passing some more egregious tax reforms that would make sure that their friends didn't have to pay more taxes before they left office. And so we're what we really need to I don't want to scare us, right? But I do want us to be very mindful of what's at stake. And so we need to drill down and get our folks out to vote over the next 32 days. We need to be prepared on day 33 to fight through the lame duck. And then we need to start January 2019 looking towards November 2020. So I'm going to stop there.
Thank you so much, Deirdre, for the state of play, for those scenarios, and also for making the strong connection to how our anti-poverty work stands vulnerable in this next election cycle. And getting out to vote is actually a vote for poor people, a vote for poor folks. So thank you for that. I'm going to ask now that Emil Washington, who is with the Black Church PAC, will talk to us about his organization, One, and ways that we can all influence this election cycle and future election cycles. Brother Emil, we're on you.
Hello, can you hear me? Okay, I couldn't hear myself. So thank you again, Pastor Francois, for this opportunity. Excuse any background noise. I'm in LA actually doing meetings around the PAC. So a little background information. The Black Church PAC, founded under New Nation Rising, started in Alabama right before the Senate race when we were looking to figure out how to defeat Roy Moore and Doug Jones race. And there was a belief that, you know, if we combine our resources and bring people together, we can actually make an impact in such a red state. And we were able to do that by, you know, not only pushing the vote out, which we have to do at every election, but also raising money and putting it behind the issues and candidates and targeting what, you know, many call low propensity voters, or what people call, you know, undesirable, or whatever the case may be. Putting money directly on the ground and into the communities to ensure that not only does the vote get out, but that the message for the candidates that we support will continue to evolve. So fast forward, this year, we've made a very conscious effort in being a major player in the 2018 elections to go after those candidates who will support our issues around criminal justice reform, around environmental justice, around women's health and reproductive rights, specifically things that will directly impact our communities, but people we can also hold accountable and be able to, when, you know, the rubber meets the road, they know that we help them get there, not only in our votes, you know, when people come to the Black churches on Sunday, but also because there was dollars that were put into the ground, into resources, or also dollars that were put into digital advertising and ensuring that our voices were heard in a very collective way. And so, you know, what we've been doing, like I said, is actively fundraising. So, you know, going to do online fundraising, targeting ads, and showing people that in order to really be at play the way that the white evangelical church is, we have to put our money there, and we have to support not only candidates, but we have to support initiatives. We have to, you know, if we were in a place where we could have actively mobilized a lot more around or against, rather, Judge Kavanaugh, now Justice Kavanaugh, we might have been able to make a bigger impact early on. But having that structure gives us that space, the platform, and unification of all the different denominations who are at play to show, like, understand how this game works, and until the rules change, we need to be able to play in the same structure and framework that many others have been able to succeed in. So we are endorsing Stacey Abrams, we're endorsing Andrew Gillum, we're endorsing Lucy McBride, we're endorsing Ayanna Pressley and okay, and we're endorsing Stephen Horsford in Nevada and a few others. Those are just some of the very where we're going to make a huge impact and play out in this cycle to ensure that come November, you know, after the election is done and when everybody's waking up, we have an agenda that we can push in local states, in you know, congressional districts, from the ground up, going into 2019, going into 2020, and know that, you know, this arm is at play, and all of the work that you all are doing to get the vote out can coalesce around the work that we're doing to ensure that candidates we believe and support have the resources that they need, and the issues that we want to pass, such as Amendment 4 in Florida, to ensure that felons have their restoration, their voter rights restored. Those are the things that we're able to do from a PAC side that falls in line and does not take away from our C3 statuses of our churches, because we're not doing it as a church, but we're doing it as a collective of individuals who believe in the Black church.
Thank you so much, Brother Washington, for this very needed angle into talking about Black politics, thinking about how far does the Black dollar go, and with our large spending power, I think you've given us a great example of how we can actually allow our money to work for a better democracy. So thank you so much. If you guys have questions for Deirdre, for Brother Washington, or Brother Dunbar, who's getting ready to come on, I ask that you put those questions not in the chat, but there's a tab that says Q&A, and it's there where you submit those questions, and I'll be able to keep up with your questions as we move through the evening. So if you have questions for any of our panelists, you can key those questions into the Q&A component, and we'll make sure that every question get addressed. I'm going to turn it now over to our last panelist for the evening, William Dunbar. William is a phenomenal, innovative organizer, community organizer. He's worked with some of our leading, some of our historic social justice organizations, from the Urban League to the NAACP, and he is currently doing some GOTV work, some Get Out the Vote work in connection with the NAACP, I believe. But I'm also grateful that he is now a part of the Black Church Center family. He'll be giving primary leadership to our environmental justice advocacy and activism in Pennsylvania. So, Brother Dunbar, the floor is yours.
Can everyone hear me? Let me make sure. Okay, good. All right. So I appreciate that warm welcome, Willie. And as Willie said, my name is William Dunbar. I am currently the lead consultant or state director for the NAACP here in Pennsylvania, and kind of center my comments and remarks around that this evening. The NAACP has decided this particular cycle, with everything that is going on in our country, that to roll out under the leadership of the new President Derek Johnson, to roll out a new initiative and pilot program to a paid program in 6 key states, battleground states around the country: North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Ohio, Florida, and one is escaping me now. And so Pennsylvania being one of those states, the plan is, the thought process is, one, we just wrapped up, most of our states except for North Carolina because of the storm, just wrapped up our voter registration program, where we had target areas that we really wanted to focus on African Americans, running paid campaigns, have canvassers in place, have offices mobilized to register a universe of voters, depending on the state. In particular, here in Pennsylvania, that number was around 17,000 voters in the African American community, and we're able to surpass that goal here in other states, including Florida and North Carolina. And so the larger narrative around the program was that what we saw from the research and data was that in these key states and key target congressional races, Senate races around the country, that if African Americans came out to vote and we were able to increase the popular vote by 3% in these states, then we would be able to control the narrative, not necessarily on any partisan side, because we know that the churches, because of their 501c3 status, need to be nonpartisan, and the NAACP as well. But the African Americans would control who was elected, whether it was a Democrat or Republican or independent. And so with that data, we wanted to not only register to increase the registration in these states through this pilot program, but also now moving into a GOTV plan through election day. And as some of the other panelists have said, it is extremely crucial for us as a community to not just vote every 4 years on presidential elections, but also the midterm elections. And that's why we're starting in this cycle to really educate and empower our community to engage in the process, no matter what party that one may be supporting. And so NAACP has been able to raise close to $7-8 million for this work in a short span of time, maybe about 3-4 months. So if you're in any of these key states, I would suggest that you You can ask me for the contact information or contact your local branch. I can also tell you your state director, because we want to partner with the churches to whether it is to have canvassing operations in communities, whether it's to hold candidate forums, which is allowed as long as the churches invite all the candidates that may be running for that particular office on the congressional or on the U.S. Senate level. Also, to hold educational forums at the church around the importance of voting, why it's important to vote around these particular issues in the state that each state may be facing or local community may be facing. So we are absolutely partnering with, we want to partner with churches, we want to partner with community organizations that may be affiliated with the church that can add to this work, because the plan is to do a pilot this time to work out all of the kinks and ultimately continue this work through the 19 and ultimately to the 2020 election as well. So that's kind of the thought process behind it. There will be major campaigns. I'm sure some of you have saw, whether it's on social media, there will be commercials running, there will be mailers coming out in target communities. And so I want people to really understand, and I want to emphasize that this pilot and these resources are strictly dedicated to our community. We are not trying to register certain Democrats or Republicans. Our goal is African American votes, because what we realized with the data was that if we vote, we control the narrative around these issues, particularly in states that we are largely populated. So if we vote, I'm going to say that again, if we vote like our life depends on it, we affect the change that we seek to see. So I encourage all of you to, ask any of the questions you may have about the work that we are doing at the NAACP, and so I can feel free to answer. So I'll turn it back over to you.
All right. Thank you, William. Thank you, Emil. Thank you, Deirdre, for getting us started, and Dr. Stewart for getting us started for this, what I hope will be a fruitful exchange with the sisters and brothers who are on the call, or our family members who are on the call. Deirdre, if you don't mind, I want to, remember, if you want to key in your questions, you want to submit your questions, you can do that pretty easily in the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen, at the bottom of this frame. And if you cannot find the Q&A section, of course, we'll do our best to follow, to keep track of your comments and your questions in the chat. But it's easier for us if you submit your questions in the Q&A section. Deirdre, I want to talk to you. You really helped us to think about. You helped us to really think about anti-poverty work as something to vote for. America's long tenure anti-poverty initiatives. It really helped us to think about how the conservatives are really attacking the American safety net, and have really, by declaring an end to the war on poverty, has really declared a war on the poor. So is there any way you can help? How can we start to think about this election cycle as bigger than personalities? This is not about let's vote to put pressure on Trump. Let's vote so we can impeach Trump. But can you really help us? How do we get beyond the personalities to start thinking about what policies are at stake when I go to the ballot?
So that is a great question. I think I want to start with one thing, and then I'm going to answer that. So the first thing is, like, I started off saying, the war on poverty is over. And I know that when we hear the word poverty or the poor, many of the times that we're thinking about it, we're thinking about people who are on the street with a sign that says, homeless, I need some food. Well, that's the abject poverty. Like that is poverty. And most of the times, the programs that we're talking about still cover people who are 200% below the poverty line, and like the folks that you see that are like in extreme poverty. The poverty we're talking about is mom and them poverty. It's, you know, your uncle and them poverty. It's your grandma and them poverty. It's the soccer mom poverty, right? It's the woman or the family or the, you know, the single dad that is, you know, they're working a job, maybe they're working 2 or 3 jobs, but the amount of money they're making doesn't make their ends meet. So I want to just keep on driving this home, because I don't want people to leave thinking like, oh, you know, we got to do something because they're going to, you know, it's something about like extreme poverty. This is about the folks that you see every day, the people that sit in the pews every day. So I want to say that. And then the question was like, what do we need to be looking at? And so the answer to that is your local officials, your decision makers, local officials' voting records. Like, nothing tells me about what you think about the poor or what you think about my issues. Any of my issues is how you voted on them. And that all of that is public record. And so I live in Nashville, Tennessee. And I can look at my senators and my state representatives, from the House of Representatives. I can look at anybody's voting record and say, what did they, when it was time to, when they were trying to repeal the Affordable Care Act, how did my senator vote on that repeal? You get what I'm saying? Yes or no? That's public record. So if I'm, and it's not hard to find. So if I'm what I feel like the first line of defense is for you to look at their voting records. How did they vote on the Affordable Care Act, on the Farm Bill? How are they voting on issues of poverty? Generally speaking, what have they said about poverty? Did they stand behind the conservatives as they said that the war on poverty is over? So you're really looking at not what they say during the election cycle, because, you know, they're kissing babies and talking about, you know, their faith values over the next 30 days. But what will really tell you, what tells the tale is their voting record. So that's out there.
Yes, thank you for that. That's really helpful. This question comes from the audience. Is from Reverend Stacy Hamilton, and this question can be answered by any of our panelists, or all 3 can probably approach this in a different way. She asks, how do we impact those who don't believe their vote matters, or that there are no candidates looking out for them? How do we engage potential members of the electorate who are convinced that their vote doesn't matter, or they don't see the types of candidates that they can believe in? How do we cut against this political distrust that exists in our communities? William, I'm gonna throw it to you, Brother Dunbar, if you can.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I would say that one of the first things we should do is that even if we feel that we have candidates that are not necessarily to our liking or share all of the same values, I think no candidate will share all of the exact values. But I think what we should do is that we should spend time educating our community around the things, education around the things that affect our daily lives that these elected officials are voting on when they go to DC or even their state house in their state. So I think the first piece is educating the things that, like, for example, the Farm Bill. I think a lot of people may hear the Farm Bill, but don't know that the WIC and the welfare and SNAP benefits are attached to those things, or they have students or grandchildren are in HBCUs, and the funding is impacted by the Farm Bill. So I think the first piece would be to educate. And then the second piece is stress the importance of being engaged. Being engaged, I think all election and politics are local. So I think the first piece is that we want them to be engaged locally around the local issues that are affecting their daily lives, so that ultimately when they feel empowered in their community, they will ultimately, individual will ultimately feel that voting and being engaged on a national level is also very important outside of just the presidential election. So I think a lot of it, we run into, and around this work that I've been doing for a number of years, is that people don't really understand the legislation or whether or not, or the policies that are affecting their daily lives. We spend a lot of time looking from social media or media to tell us what we should care about instead of really spending time educating our own people.
Good. Thank you so much for that. Are there any other questions? If you have questions, you can key those in now. Deirdre, did you want to take a stab at that question as well?
I did want to get in on that a little bit because I think that it speaks directly to why we're doing the work that we're doing on this call, is because for so long we have bought into the narrative and into the way of being in this country that we say we're a democracy, but we kind of act like a monarchy. So we act like we elect these people to office, and then they are not our representatives, but some kind of way they become little kings and queens, right? They get to do whatever they want, vote how they want, etc. And so it's about the displacement of the populace, the displacement of people and what people want at the center of this process, and that this person is truly just your representative. And so what is your role all year long? What is your role through all of these different cycles versus just, on November the 6th? And so I think the first thing I would do if somebody, if I was, talking to somebody who was like, my vote don't matter, or nobody represents who I am, you know what I mean? The very first thing I'm going to do is agree with them. You're right. You're right. We've allowed this to go on too long, and that you are who we are looking for, because we the people need to get back on our jobs. That, if I was on my job, my real job, like if I'm on my real job and I'm not performing, they fire me, right? And so we've not looked at the process of electing elected officials as a hiring process, and we are actually their bosses. And so we need to change that around again. And so that's how I like it.
Yeah, I mean, very real. I like that, because we go to the polls potentially offering pink slips to people who don't represent our interests, who don't represent our values. And I think it can't be overstated to say that there are no perfect politicians, as there are no perfect people. And there's no one person who's going to champion all of your issues, may not vote the way you want them to vote. But we do have an obligation to hold people accountable, and reminding ourselves that that's what our votes do. Our votes hold our elected officials accountable, and when they don't deliver on their promises, then we have a right to unemploy them in our next elections. So I think that's Deirdre, that's great framework, great language, imagery for thinking about the accountability loop that exists in a democratic, a representative democracy like ours. So thank you for that. We have a question here from Kirstina, who is in New York. She does political work there and is an organizer there as well. She says that we need a new social contract in this country as it relates to fighting and ending poverty. How can we make a commitment to true radical anti-poverty policies as a condition of our vote? if elected officials are coming to Black houses of worship asking for our congregation's votes, how do we use that as an opportunity to get them to make a public commitment to helping the poor and ending poverty in this country? So let's take the first part. Either one can jump in on it. I ask that you both engage on it. But the first part of her question is, how can we make a commitment to true radical anti-poverty policies? How can we make that a condition for our vote? We'll start with you, Deirdre.
Yay, we start with me. So, I mean, I think she laid it out. Like, I don't think that she left a lot unsaid. One, we have to see ourselves as a voting bloc, which I feel like that's a part of what we're doing here at the Black Church Center for Justice and Equality, and definitely will begin to, expand this work with our anti-poverty post-election conversation in late November, early December. So, like, we've got to say these are the things that we want our elected officials to do, and I do think that so our pulpits, like, I just don't understand this. It's like our pulpits are our pulpits, and so if an elected official or a candidate is coming to your church, and that that you have a commitment to, a true social contract, that you're fighting for the programs, the safety net programs, for jobs, for the Voting Rights Act, for access to affordable health care, public education. You and your congregants know what the issues are in your community and what you want them to stand up for. How then do we allow them to come in and kiss babies and stand and just kind of give a blatant speech in our give a speech versus answering very poignant questions? And so I think that the way in which we get at that is that we've got to take we take our pulpits back. Like, we're excited that you came this morning, glad to see you. Our congregation is very, concerned about mass incarceration, and this is how we think, we want to dismantle the public school to prison pipeline. You're invited to come in and talk about this issue. Like, if you want to address this issue, you can take, you can take a platform, you can take a mic. But if you don't, then you don't get a mic in my church, in my congregation. And I think that we've not always, some pastors are, hopefully, but we've not always been as bold as to tell them that they can't speak. And there should be a privilege to speak in our congregations, and it should be, and they should be speaking about our issues.
William, you want to jump in on this?
I mean, I think neither one of them kind of left a lot to be said, but I think one, a lot of the work that I'm doing now is exactly around that, creating, or not really creating, that's not what I'm looking for, but educating our folks in our community around that we are the strongest voting bloc in this country. And that in our churches, in our Greek organizations, and our nonprofits like the Urban League, that we have to not just have the same folks doing the work, but really we're out in the community creating a space where people feel like we matter, like our voices matter, that the elected officials are held accountable to a standard by which our communities are lifted up, whether that is through job creation, whether that is through criminal justice reform, and many other issues that our communities are facing, healthcare. So I think, like Deidre said, really empowering that voting bloc and making sure that we're consistent not just we know like the Obama effect that we had, that I think we got complacent that once we had everybody was on board to elect President Obama, which was excellent. But if we still engage millennials and that generation the way Obama had successfully did then, we wouldn't necessarily be in the predicament that our country is and at this point. So I think that is a key piece of how we do it and engage in the voter block, because that is how it changed. Government is not going anywhere. Elected officials are not going anywhere. So the way we change the narrative is by using our power and our voice to vote.
Yeah, and I love that. And I think that the only other thing that I would add is that as it relates, because we're talking about institutional power as well as our own individual power. So yes, I have the power, one voice, one vote. I have the power inside of my vote. But the reason that we're on this call together right now is because we're talking about the collective power or the voting bloc of the Black church. And so when I think about Black church, I grew up in Black church. And, you know, as a young person growing up in Black church, I can tell you when my choir rehearsal is, I can tell you when when Vacation Bible School started. I can tell you what time Sunday school started. So, but can anyone tell me when does the social justice ministry at your church meet? Because if we're, we have to have practice around this. It's not every, we agree that this is a democracy and we agree that we're the people who need to be making these decisions and we need to hold folks accountable. It's not just, every 2 years or every 4 years that we have to consistently be aware of what's going on and hold people accountable. So we've got to develop, whether it's a social justice ministry, a set of people inside of your congregation that are going to be the heralders of justice, but some set of people in your church need to know what are the issues that our congregation cares about, where are they on the local level, the state level, and the national level, and then how do we interject our voice in those fights all throughout the year.
One thing I would add to that one, Willie, is that there was a time, exactly you just like, I grew up in, I'm sure a lot of us are familiar with Dr. William Shaw at White Rock Baptist Church, and as born and raised in the church there. And I can remember a time that for me coming up around being politically engaged was our pastors and our churches led the way, not our elected officials. In order for our elected officials, when you needed a job or scholarships or resources or any engagement from an elected official, one would go see their pastor because the pastors were the leaders of our communities. I think in some ways, and in a large part, that people don't see their pastors in that light in some places. And then in other places, I think, and particularly here, and I could talk about Philadelphia and Pennsylvania, that you have some larger churches that sometimes all of this great social justice work, we have to get back to people being able to engage their pastor in a way that when you have some, by default, when you have a larger congregation, it's harder to know your members and people to hear what you're saying around elected official, and the importance of supporting or voting or what have you. And when there's not the engagement piece on a day-to-day, weekly basis beyond people just coming into church looking for the Sunday sermon opposed to the real community engagement on a weekly or daily basis. I think that part is also how we mobilize our communities again. When we look back at the civil rights movement, the way people went to their churches, the civil rights movement was birthed out of our churches. We have to get back to that in the African American community, and empowering young pastors, up and coming pastors, to do this work like our ancestors.
Good, man. Thanks for that. There's a question from Kim Irby. How do we out politicians that look like us, who compromise to line their own pockets with backdoor deals that silence our agenda from being addressed? Either one? William, you want to jump at that one first?
How do we out the politician? I think back to what we said earlier about going to the polls, is issuing a pink slip for those elected officials. Simple as that. The only way that you can address any of these elected officials who look like us, or that necessarily, even if they don't look like us, that give us lip service when it's time for election time, but do something different in Harrisburg or in Washington, or the state capitol, I should say, is by issuing them a pink slip on election day. So we should encourage, after we mobilize, I think the next thing, once we mobilize and we really, create a continual voter bloc that are affecting change around the country, we need to develop and build our own candidates to replace these elected officials. That is how we affect the change. So we support, we register to vote, we mobilize, then we encourage, we educate, we build up our own elected officials within our own communities. We support them, give them the resources they need, and we vote those other individuals out. That is the best way that we do it.
Yeah, I think that's good, and it goes in line with Deirdre was talking about this reclamation of our pulpits. How do we reclaim our pulpits for good and for justice and for transformation? And part of that is using the pulpit as a resource of political accountability. I think part of our job is to raise awareness. The conscientizing of the pew is one of the jobs of the pulpit, and part of that is calling out duplicity, calling out hypocrisy. So I think that using church spaces as truth-telling spaces is where we tell the truth about our elected officials, even those that look like us, and what does it mean to call these politicians? How do we out them? I think open letters, op-eds, social media. To some extent, we have to serve as watchdogs for politicians that, as has been said, work for us, and so they can't get over on us if we're keeping a steady eye on how they vote, how they use public money, how they build alliances with the other side, with whatever side, with other parties. I think that it's important for us to be, this idea of being woke. It's up to us to pay attention to these politicians that we need to call out. We have to pay attention to what they're actually doing, and using our pen, using our microphone, using our bodies to show up outside their offices, leading up to elections, because elections are 2 to 4 years, 6-year terms for our U.S. senators, and so it's that keeping the constant pressure on to let them know we are watching. And I think seeing the Black churches as these kind of watchdogs, these policy watchdogs, political watchdogs, I think is one of our obligations if we're going to get the democracy that we deserve, and not just the democracy that some rich white man bought, or the democracy that politicians sell us after they get it, sell us on their way to office, that they never intend on realizing once they get to office. So that would be how I
Yeah.
Yeah, another thing I would add on to what you said, Willie, I mean, because it's on my heart, is that we have to be, as a community, how we hold elected officials accountable, particularly in our community. We have to look around and say there are still massive amount of unemployment in our community, drugs, crime, and we have elected officials. I know here locally, and I'm sure I know other places around the country as well, that have elected officials that have been there 20, 30 years. In whether it's Congress or state house races, we have to not be complacent that now the holiday season is coming around and they're giving out turkeys that they give out every year, or the summer concert series, and really focus on the policies that impact our lives daily that they're voting on. What kind of legislation have they presented or tried to get passed? So like I said, whether that's locally, state, federal, what have they done, and how have they been held accountable in the job that we send them to their elected bodies to do? And if they are not doing that job, we need to replace them. And so I just, too many times as we have these organizations like the NAACP, like that I'm representing now, and I think President Johnson is doing an excellent job at this, is that it's no longer are we going to be the generation that we're waiting for some hero to come and save us. We need to empower ourselves to do this work, to represent ourselves, to make sure that our voices are heard around the necessary policies and changes that we want to see in our community now. And I think one thing I will highlight in this Supreme Court Kavanaugh debacle, I'll call it, that we have, is that the Republicans, if we think back, the Republicans back about 10, 15 years, even 20 years, had a plan to not take over congressional or Senate seats. What they did was they started locally in school boards, in local courts, and in state houses, and then and raised up a new generation of leadership that has now benefited them now in order to get an election of a Donald Trump. So then ultimately they can care less about all of the craziness things that we know our president is saying, but they are laser focused on their agenda and their policies, and whoever they need to have in place to do that, they put in place. And that is what we need to do as a community. Focus on our agenda and not the personalities or the individuals in these elected seats.
Yeah. And I think that talking about the accountability component that you just mentioned in one of your last responses, is that how do we begin to see what does it mean to home grow politicians? That's a way to ensure accountability. Although I once had my own sort of conflicted issues with the pastor politician model, pastors who run for office, like an Adam Clayton Powell or something. I had my own concerns about that kind of model. But what it did was it does offer a built-in accountability, that accountability structure, accountability dynamic, because what it says is that you're at home with the people that you represent, as opposed to being drive-by a visitor to this community. You're homegrown. You're a part of this community. You have residency in a particular church, in a particular community. And so I do want us to start thinking about what does it mean for Black churches to groom politicians, to groom elected officials, where we know that the messaging is progressive, is liberative, because it comes from a community that is inherently progressive and liberative. So I think even as we were with Emil talking about how do we use the black dollar to influence democracy, we need to think about what does it mean to groom our own candidates, to shape our own political destinies and reclaim our political futures, because we are birthing the politicians from a very particular liberative, moral, progressive framework that is Black prophetic religion, Black prophetic traditions. So I think we've exhausted a good amount of time. I want to thank Dr. Gina Stewart for getting us kicked off. I want to thank Deirdre Reed, Emil Washington, and William Dunbar for their great contribution to today. I'm going to share my screen, but I also want to thank two members of our safety net team, Leda and Reverend Yvonne, for their work in making tonight happen. And I also want to walk us through just a very cursory look at the toolkit that will be available. Tomorrow, I'll be emailing a toolkit to help with the GOTV work to use in our congregations, in our communities, with our teams. This toolkit, this midterm election toolkit was developed primarily by Reverend Yvonne and Leda, and so I'm grateful for their contributions to this. So I do want to remind us that I will be sending out an email to all of our attendees and to our listserv that will include will ultimately include a recording of tonight's session along with the toolkit to be used in your respective communities. And I'm excited about this toolkit, and I'll share my screen now just for the last moments. I'll share my screen so that you can see exactly what I'm talking about. Here is the toolkit that will be circulating in the next day or so. It's our poverty and voting rights and the midterms, which was designed just for this call to help us push through these less than a month that we have left until election day. And in it includes a rationale, a theological and liberative overview of why we do this work. So if you need language around messaging this type of work for your congregations, for your leaders, for your pastors, the language is already built in. Likewise, we have a robust social media component, from sample tweets to sample posts to images that you can use. So I encourage you to take advantage of the social media component. There's also a 5-day devotional that is a part of this toolkit. So if you want to lead your congregation, your family, friends through this devotional, it's a 5-day devotional series. It can actually be expanded to become a Bible study component, if that's how you choose to use it. And then we also have sample pledge cards. So if you want to get some midterm election commitment cards out, so that you can at least put on your constituents' minds that this is important, so important that we need you to sign up to do this work. That's all in our toolkit. So we got some theological rationale in the toolkit. We have social media models, social media engagement, sample social media engagement for you. And also we have a 5-day devotional and midterm election cards that you can replicate. I hope that tonight was beneficial for us as we think about how to move forward. Some very clear things. You can use the toolkit. You can make sure that your registration season is all but done. So now it's time for us to shift to what does Get Out the Vote look like. So develop a GOTV plan, a Get Out the Vote plan for your community, for your congregation. If you would like help establishing a social justice ministry, a dear member of our community, Shannon Williams, reminded me that I should be reminding you that the Black Church Center is a wonderful resource to help you walk through the discernment process for creating a social justice ministry and some mechanics on how to start that social justice ministry. Also, we encourage you to have some civic engagement, some civic education happening at your congregation. I think one of the greatest travesties in our democracy is that civics 101 has been taken out of our schools, and so we're asking 18-year-olds to participate in a system that they haven't been taught about. And I think the church can serve as a civic education space. So those are some quick things that you can think through. I hope that you will use this that you will use this voter registration, voter turnout toolkit as we move toward these last days leading up to the election. Very soon, we're going to be making an announcement about a post-election summit that we're looking to have in the city of Atlanta, a post-election summit. So we'll be pushing that information out soon so that you can make sure you get your tickets and you are present for this post-election conference. It's time for us to plan the revolution. It's time for us to plan what our democracy is going to look like. And the Black Church agenda and the Black Church Center needs to align with a Black church legislative priorities, and we hope to use that session to develop some legislative priorities that we will use to hold our elected officials accountable and to say we don't just sign on to what our politicians want us to think, but we have our own vision, our own moral paradigm for what this country should look like. And next year, will mark 400 years that Black bodies have been in America. And so we want to make sure that we're observing that year as a year of demonstration, a year of resistance, a year of civil disobedience. So look out for that information. So not only do I need you to look out for the post-election summit conversation, and not only do I need you to look out for how next year we're commemorating 400 years of being in this country, where we're going to make some serious ask on the down payment for what this nation owes us for our work, but I also want you to mark your calendars now for October 30th. October 30th, we're going to be having a very, very important conversation on sexual violence in society and the church. On October 30th at 7 p.m., we're having a conversation on sexual violence in the church and society. And we have three phenomenal experts who will be with us that day. We'll have the Reverend Dr. Martha Simmons of Women of Color in Ministry Project. We'll have Nichelle Guidry, who is the Dean of the Chapel, Dean of Sisters Chapel at Spelman College. And we'll have Yvonne Briggs, who does phenomenal work around building community for sexual assault and sexual violence survivors. So I'm looking forward to that conversation of breaking the silence on sexual violence and sexual misconduct in church and society. And those three experts are going to help us think through this from a theological lens, from a faith lens, from a moral lens. And so I'm looking forward to October 30th at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for the conversation on sexual violence in church and society. I hope you all have a great night. Thank you for sharing this time with us. I also I send you regards from the chair of our board, the Reverend Delman Coates, who had scheduling conflict today. But Dr. Coates wanted me to wish you all well and thank you all for joining us for this conversation. I hope to see you on October 30th. Thanks so much. Peace.